All right, everybody, let's get this show started. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery Series. It is always great to be with you for another edition of our program, brought to you by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education and us here at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, where we dive into amazing and interesting topics in science, nature, education, and more. And we find and have just the best people to come join us on the program and talk about the things they know a lot about, the things that they're passionate about. They share their knowledge with us, and then we all get to know things, and we all get to learn new things, and we all get to revel in our new knowledge and in the expert knowledge of those around us. And in that way, Lunchtime Discovery Series has become really one of just the best programs that I think we can offer. At least, maybe it's one of like the best programs out there in state government that gets offered. I don't know. Don't tell anybody else I said that. But, right, we all gather here every week, Wednesdays at noon, and we have a great time. We ask questions, we learn new things, and we have just a fantastic community of learners and interesting people right here. So I'm all about it. I'm glad that you're here with me. My name is Chris Smith. I work here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. I will be your host. And today on the program, we are going to just jump into a topic that's actually, at least at this moment in time, near and dear to us at the Museum of Natural Sciences. We happen to have a special exhibit on here in downtown Raleigh called Spiders, Fear to Fascination, where you can see 250 live and preserved spiders, species from all around the world. It's pretty cool. It's an amazing exhibit. So make sure if you haven't and you can, come and check out Spiders, Fear to Fascination. If you think you're somebody that's really not great with or around spiders, this exhibit is for you. We can work on that. You can get close to them and it won't be dangerous at all, or at least we can do away with sort of that fear of the danger, right? You can actually hold a digital spider in your hand, for example, instead of touching a live one. And maybe we can do that whole fear to fascination part. Anyway, it's really cool. Come and check it out. And maybe to give you a little taste of why you should like and appreciate spiders, we've got a very special guest today. Matt Bertone is the director and diagnostic entomologist at the North Carolina State University Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. Matt is an expert on all things bugs, and I'm excited to hear about recluse spiders today. Hey, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Chris, and everyone else. Thanks, Marty, for inviting me for the lunchtime series.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know that like you tweet a lot and you post online a lot about insects and why people should love them. Do recluse spiders fall? Are these in like your top 10 favorite bugs, or do you have favorite bugs?
I really like them. Every day it changes, of course, but I really like recluse spiders. I think they are way more feared than they need to be, and hopefully, after my talk today, people will also see that they aren't as fearsome as people think. There's a little bit to it, but obviously there. But yeah, I hope to inspire people to see both sides of things, and especially with arthropods, where they're usually a little gross to people or fearsome, but they really aren't in reality. So I like to try and present the good side of these things too.
Many good sides. Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen now. Okay, hopefully you all can see that.
Looks good.
Okay, well, great. Thanks for having me. And so today I'm going to tell you about some truths and myths about recluse spiders. These are very maligned spiders. In fact, they're probably the most feared spider in the world. And spiders in general are feared, and these bring it up to another level even. But I will say, in reality, they should not be as feared as people think or do. So first, I just want to introduce spiders because I love them. So they're among the most diverse groups of arthropods out there. These are animals with an exoskeleton and jointed legs. So insects are arthropods, but spiders are a group of arachnids. And there are about 40,000 species described worldwide, even more. Just about every day, there are more species described. Virtually all are venomous predators. The venomous part is what a lot of people fear, but mostly they're using their venom to subdue prey and pre-digest it to feed on. They also are one of the many groups of arthropods that produce silk, and all spiders produce silk in some form. Many use it to trap insects and their prey in webs, but a lot just use it to line burrows and make egg sacs, things like that. They do have very complex behaviors and morphologies, and they are adapted to many environments, from kind of tropical places to arid deserts to inside homes. They can be found all over the world, basically. Now, I just want to touch on some spider anatomy so that when we're talking about some of these structures that people know what we're talking about. So here's a very beautiful little carinid spider that was found in my house here in North Carolina. And we have the two major sections of the body, the abdomen, which is the posterior, or called the opisthosoma sometimes, and then the cephalothorax, the prosoma, which is basically the head region where the legs are attached and all kind of the appendages. And of course, based on the appendages, they have these two small leg-like structures called pedipalps, which are actually modified in males to deliver sperm to females. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. They have these 4 walking legs, and then underneath the tip of the abdomen, they have spinnerets, which are little finger-like appendages that produce the silk. Also, spiders have different eye arrangements, and this is actually really important for diagnostics, so identifying them. So the pattern and the size and shape can all be helpful in identifying them. And spiders can have, some cave spiders have no eyes, but typically spiders have 8 eyes. And you can see in this crab spider in the middle, they come in typically 2 rows, an anterior and a posterior row. And spiders, many of the spiders with the small eyes use it for kind of seeing light and movement. But spiders like jumping spiders are very visually acute and can see prey from quite a distance. So they have very good eyesight. And so, again, a lot of people probably don't like looking at spider eyes in the faces of spiders, but oh well, here you are. And obviously, this talk is going to have a lot of spiders. It will have some gross stuff in it too, otherwise. But, if you're tuning in, hopefully you're not too afraid of spiders to see some on the screen. They're not going to jump out and hurt you at all. So, and here's kind of where the nasty part comes for a lot of people. Spiders have these appendages on the front of their head called chelicerae, which are modified in different arachnids to do different functions. And in spiders, they're particularly modified to bear these pointy fangs on the tips. And this is actually how they deliver their venom, which, again, like I said, is usually used to subdue prey, but many venomous animals, of course, use their venom in defense as well. So spiders can use that defensively to kind of fend off predators or potential dangers. But for the most part, they're using that to grab and pre-digest their prey that they're going to eat. And the chelicerae on this jumping spider, this beautiful metallic green-blue, and you can see these very large fangs, which they have to keep clean, and that's what it's doing right here. Okay, so that's enough about spiders in general. Let's talk about recluse spiders. So recluse spiders are in the genus Loxosceles, and they are in the family Sicariidae. They actually were moved around a bunch of times to different families, and there are about 172 species of Sicariids in the world, in 3 genera. There's actually, if you ever want to see a funny one, there's a lot of funny videos online of the sand spiders, the 3-eyed sand spiders, Sicarius and Hexophthalma. And they do this really cool behavior where they bury themselves in the sand and they kind of push sand on their bodies. There's some really funny videos out there of them doing that. But otherwise, the majority of all Sicariids are going to be Loxosceles species. And there are about 143 species almost worldwide. They're found in many places. Some of them are not native to those places, but most of the diversity is going to be in the Western Hemisphere and South America. There are a lot in Africa as well. There are a few in Europe, a few in China, and Asia, but otherwise, they're kind of sparse other parts of the world. And actually, in the U.S., we have 11 native species, and 2 introduced species. So there is a decent diversity here in the U.S., but you'll see where they're found later on in the talk. So what makes a recluse spider a recluse spider? I should mention that some of these spiders are called brown spiders in other part of the world, which is not very good either because there's lots of brown spiders out there. So we go really specific on how to identify things. So the number one way to identify recluse spiders, and this is actually true for the other Sicariids in the world, but they have 6 eyes arranged in 3 pairs. And you can see them pretty clearly here on this juvenile. So unlike other spiders that typically have, many other spiders that typically have 8 eyes, these have 6, and these 3 pair arrangement is fairly unique to them, and is the best characteristic for identifying recluse spiders. Now, I will say that their close relatives, the spitting spiders, also have this same eye arrangement with the 3 pairs. But they are much more patterned. They have this very bulbous cephalothorax or head region, and they do actually spit venomous silk, but they are not harmful at all. They're completely harmless. We do have some. There are many species that are found throughout the U.S. and the world. In fact, this Thoracica is a European species. It's all over the world. These used to be classified with recluses, and again, they're very closely related. But these are the only spiders around that you would find that 3 sets of eyes and the 6 total eyes in the U.S. basically, other than recluse spiders. Now, another characteristic you'll look for, and which lends to one of their common names, is the fiddle or violin pattern on the cephalothorax. So they're often called fiddleback spiders or violin spiders. They have this nice little pattern here. I will say, though, that in some individuals, it's fairly faint. So, a lot of people use that to ID these spiders, and it's not always distinct. And the alternative is that some other spiders have similar types of patterns on their cephalothorax. It's a little vaguer, but it definitely does look like a violin, but I wouldn't use that as the only characteristic for identifying them. Again, the 3 sets of eyes is probably the best one. And then another thing that you can use to identify them is that they really lack patterns or stripes on any other part of the body. So they have this violin shape on their head, the cephalothorax, but they really don't have any other patterns on their body. There's a little asterisk there you'll see in a second. The other great way to identify them is they have these very velvety hairs on their legs, but no thick spines. And in other spiders, almost all other spiders will have at least some thorny or thicker spines on their legs. So these are kind of the characteristics to use. I will say that some African species of recluses are very beautiful and patterned. So this really only works, the non-patterned body only works for the US and probably most of the Western Hemisphere. But like I said, in some areas, they do have actually patterned recluses, which it's a very beautiful spider here, I think. And finally, I always ask people how big they think they are. Either they overestimate or underestimate, but the mature recluse spiders are about the size of a U.S. quarter. So they can sit kind of nicely on there. And so that's about how big they are. I'm not sure if that's bigger or smaller than you thought, but that's about how big they are. So now that we know how to identify recluse spiders, and again, this is in general for Loxosceles species because there are many species in the U.S. and around. One other last really more scientific way to identify them is based on the male pedipalps. Now, like I said, the male pedipalps of spiders are used to transfer sperm, and so they're often used for ID. And so these are some pedipalps from some different spiders, and only one is from a brown recluse. So I guess I won't be able to hear answers, but if you think to yourself, okay, which one is from recluse? I'll give you a second to look at these. And some are much more complicated than others. I will say that the less complicated ones are typically the more primitive spiders, and technically recluses are a little bit more primitive than some other spiders. But if you guessed letter C, that is correct. The letter D is actually another recluse spider. The brown recluse is letter C, and it looks kind of like a scorpion sting. And this is the male will use this to inseminate the female. They transfer, all spiders basically transfer sperm to these and then use that as a pump to fertilize the female. But you can see how different a lot of these look and how they can be very distinct from each other. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit of the biology. So they are a little bit sexually dimorphic. So the males are typically much leggier. They have smaller bodies and longer legs in relation to each other than the females. Um, and females lay about 150 eggs in these flat egg sacs, these very spherical little cream-colored eggs in these egg sacs, about 20 to 50 per egg sac. So not a huge amount of young produced by these spiders compared to some other spiders, which may have thousands of young over their lifetime. They actually do, even though they often live indoors, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, they do kind of have a seasonality. So the eggs in the mating season, the eggs are laid in the mating season around May or July, and they're basically most abundant or most active from like April to October. They're kind of that's kind of the warm season for them, the active season. Other times of the year, they're not going to be as active. Now, these are fairly long-lived spiders too, so they don't sexually mature until they're about a year old, and they can live 3 to 5 years. So they aren't like some spiders that live only 1 year, have only one generation per year. They can have multiple overlapping generations, and the spiders can live for many years. Now, what do they eat? So they do feed on small invertebrates, especially insects. They are one of the very few spiders, or one of the few spiders that scavenge on dead prey as well. So they may, they may feed on dead insects in a home. They can be cannibalistic, but typically not. Most other spiders are very cannibalistic. And this is actually one of the reasons you'll see later that they can attain high numbers in homes. And like many spiders, they can survive long periods without food or water for months to even years, which is pretty hardcore. And so I just wanted to show you, here's a very tattered one. I think I took it off a sticky board and felt bad about it losing all these legs. So I fed it a little termite and it was very happy to eat that. But just to give you an idea of how fast and how these spiders hunt, they actually don't capture prey in a web, but they may use their webs to kind of signal that there's prey nearby. And so I have a little movie here that I'll show a few minutes of. And basically, so I dropped this was a captive brown recluse, and you'll see it in a second. They're very fast spiders, which also leads to some of the fear. But I dropped a little flower beetle, tribolium larva in there, and you can see the spider coming out of its crevice and locates the prey. And they don't have great eyesight, so what they're doing is they're feeling around for the vibrations and kind of locating the prey. And as you can see, it's kind of touching it and waiting for it to move again. And once it is happy that it's located it, she'll actually open her chelicerae, and you can see she has very tiny fangs actually, which also shows that you'd have to really press it up against your skin to get it to bite you. So these really tiny fangs are used to delicately kind of jab the prey, inject some venom, and then she'll wait for it to kind of slow down a little bit, and then bring it back to her little nest or her little cave. So very delicate. They're actually very gingerly, manipulating the prey. This one I kept for at least a year or two, I think. And she was a good eater. And let's see if we can see her again. There's those fangs, and there's her biting it. Of course, the larva is not very happy about that, but this is the circle of life. Let's see. Once she's actually done, I'm going to skip ahead real quick. So she keeps biting it until she's sure that it's not a danger to her, and she'll do that. And then once she's happy with it, she's going to start taking it back to her little lounge to feed comfortably. So just like we would do, kind of go out and get food and bring it back home, and hang out and watch TV or something. But yeah, so that's a hunting recluse. So very fast at first, but kind of ginger with the stuff, and very gingerly, and jabbing the prey with those mouth parts. Okay. So like I said, and like you saw, these are actually nocturnal hunters, and they're very reclusive. So they like to be in between, under objects, in between objects. This is kind of sometimes where the danger comes in because they like to hide in things like perhaps like clothing and whatnot. But they don't live in webs. So if you find a spider sitting in a web, it's not a recluse. And they create flat, irregular webs under objects. Now, the brown recluse, specifically Loxosceles reclusa, lives mostly in human structures, but in its native range can be found out in nature. Most other species live outdoors, although, and I'm talking about the US. In South America, some of the species are more living indoors than others. Others are much more wild, outdoor creatures. Here's another characteristic of recluses. They leave their shed skins all over the place, kind of hanging there. So if you see those, that's not a good sign. But in North Carolina especially, you're probably not going to ever see one. And here's actually a little baby one crawling around. Okay, so let's start off with myth number one. Recluses are found throughout the U.S. So this is something where everybody in every state knows somebody who's been bit by a brown recluse or found one or whatever, and that's just not true. So recluses really only live in certain parts of the U.S. Here's a map we modified from. I will say a lot of the research in this talk was done by Rick Vetter, who was an expert in University of California. He's the world expert on brown recluses. He wrote a great book. If you all want to purchase it, it has all the information you ever need to know about recluses. But he has been a strong advocate for kind of rational, dialogue and kind of emotions toward these spiders and all the kind of myths behind them. So this is kind of modified from his studies and showing the distribution of this spider. And so the brown recluse basically has the epicenter around Arkansas and Missouri in the U.S. It's basically a Midwestern central U.S. Species. And outside of the range, you're really not going to find them. Now, in the blue down here are the other recluse species, which are typically going to be found outdoors. They include a lot of desert species. You're flipping rocks in the deserts in the Southwest, you may find some recluses that are not brown recluses. But brown recluse is the most infamous and widespread one in the U.S., but it is not everywhere. And as you can see, basically anywhere around the edges of the country or in the northwestern part of the country, you will not find recluses found, really. Now, this is a very difficult subject to talk about with people because there are a lot of caveats. So one thing is that these spiders will sometimes hitchhike into new regions. And I do know of several populations that exist and persist in North Carolina. But the thing is, they don't actually disperse away from those places that they go. So if somebody moves from Arkansas to North Carolina and they bring a box that has a female that's pregnant, that can build up a population at home, but the neighbors will never see those recluses. In fact, we've had records of recluses in North Carolina for over 40 years. And in fact, some of the western parts of the state probably have some wild ones and some natural populations. But for most of the state, these populations that are here have not spread. So we would expect, every other insect that comes in the state spreads like crazy. And these aren't insects either, but every other critter that comes in the U.S. into North Carolina spreads like crazy. But these spiders have been here for 40 years in point populations that don't get out anywhere else. And in fact, it's not just the brown recluse. There are two other recluse species, the Mediterranean recluse, Loxosceles rufescens, and the Chilean recluse, Loxosceles lata, that have been known to hitchhike into other countries and other areas of the world from their native ranges. And in fact, in downtown Raleigh, we do have recluses, which I think are actually Mediterranean recluses, which often prefer buildings and kind of more urban areas. There's populations up in Washington, D.C. and other places. So we know of these populations outside of their range, but they don't spread to other places. So what I like to say is that if you're in North Carolina, you are probably never going to see a recluse in your life, unless perhaps you live in the far western part of the state, or you have one of these populations that's known. You're never going to see one. In fact, I've never seen one on my own, just kind of out and about or whatever. So functionally, they are not around these areas. And there are so many other brown spiders that are misidentified for recluses in these areas. And in fact, a lot of people report bites out in these areas, and they just aren't. They're either from something other than a spider or a spider that's not a recluse. And so again, Dr. Rick Vetter has been working hard to show that basically these things don't live outside this range typically. Now, because I showed you how to identify them, if you do find a spider you're suspicious of, take a look at these identification characters. Or if you don't know, you can always contact me at the clinic and send them in. We do definitely have populations in North Carolina, but I will say for most people in the state, you will never see one. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I was not excited to not see them, but I wanted to see them when I got here, but there weren't any around. So it took a long time before somebody told me where to go and find some. So be aware that if you live in most of these states in white and these areas in white, you are never going to see a recluse. But in this area where they are found, they can be quite common in homes. Okay, myth 2: recluses readily bite humans. Well, I put recluse in brackets here because this is in general about spider bites. Spider bites are very uncommon in general. I've been bitten once in my life. I know why, because I put a spider into a bucket of water and I grabbed it out with my hand when I was a kid and I got bit by it, which makes sense because I was harassing it. But spider bites, unfortunately, every little bump that people get, they wake up with a little red bump, automatically spider bite. Spiders just don't do that. They are really not interested in biting humans. And really, when you get bit, you typically know. You've leaned up against something, you stuck your hand in something, or put your foot in a shoe that has one in there. The spider gets pressed up against the skin. It feels threatened, like it's going to die, which it often does. And so it bites in self-defense. And so spiders do not eat humans. They don't want to bite humans, and typically are not aggressive. And so I would say for recluses and specifically, they are not aggressive spiders. They are very fast because they like to run away from things. And this is why they're also called recluse spiders. They are not interested in being around people. People squish them all the time. They are not happy with people. They just want to avoid being killed. Now, they do bite in self-defense when they're being crushed or trapped, but you really can't blame them. I mean, if you were being crushed by something, I'm sure you'd bite it too, or stab it, or do something to it to get it from crushing you. And what's really interesting is even when they're found in high numbers, in fact, there are some houses that they collected over 2,000 over a couple-month period in a home. Bites are rare. So Rick Vetter, the expert, even stayed at a house in Kansas that had over 2,000 spiders, and none of the homeowners have ever been bitten. He didn't get bitten over the few nights he stayed there. And in fact, a retired professor in our department who showed me a house here in North Carolina, his parents' house in North Carolina that was infested with them. He said that nobody had ever been bitten by one of these spiders. So as long as you know, if you live in the area where you have them or you have an infestation of them, as long as you're careful, you may do some pest control, and they are difficult to control. If you're careful, shake things out, whatnot, your likelihood of getting bitten is very, very low. And again, you saw how tiny their fangs are. They have to really be pressed up against the skin to bite. So anyway, spider bites are rare. Brown recluse bites can happen, especially in the native range, but they're not super common. And even then, we'll get to the third myth. Recluse bites will kill you or cause your skin to fall off. And I just want to there's a little warning here. There's a couple gross photos in here in this section. So I will tell you the truth about that. So the majority of actual recluse bites resolve without issues. So that's one thing. So if it does bite, again, rare. If it does happen to bite and envenomate, and it's a large enough spider, the young spiders don't have the components of the venom that would hurt you, and so it's typically the larger spiders that are more potent. Their bite, if they have a successful bite, typically resolves without issue. Some bites do result in skin necrosis, but it usually heals relatively quickly. In rarer cases, the lesion is large and can take months to heal. And that's what people, I think, are most freaked out about, I would say. But, I tricked you a little bit here. That's actually not a brown recluse bite. That's MRSA. That's a staphylococcus, resistant staphylococcus infection, bacterial infection. This is actually what a real brown recluse bite looks like. That just goes to show that any little malady on people's skin is often attributed to bites or recluses, but they do have very specific characteristics, and I'll tell you that in a minute. Now, another part of the truth, unfortunately, is that in very rare cases, less than 1% of cases, especially when children or elderly are bitten. Systemic loxoscelism can occur. Now, this is a very serious thing and can cause death. This is where the venom actually causes the red blood cells to be destroyed, and can put people in the hospital, and there have been deaths associated with this. So it's not completely false that they can't kill people. They can, but it's a very, very rare occasions. Now, unfortunately for I guess me and people here in North Carolina, we actually, when I first started in my job, we had a spider come in that was crushed. It had been crushed on a pillow, and a child had rolled over on it. And again, this is one of those rare situations where recluse was found in North Carolina. It bit a child, and the child was very sick. Now, luckily, the child survived. But they got medical attention, and it also brought up the case of another situation where another child was bitten farther away, a different situation, but still had recluses in the home. Again, if you bring them from their native range to here, you may have a population at home. And this also resulted in a very serious condition of what's called systemic loxoscelism. So I'm not going to say that it's impossible for them to kill people. It is not. But it is very, very, very rare, and it only happens, once in a while. Every decade, maybe you have one death or so. But that shouldn't make people really afraid of them, or worried, or kind of give them a bad name. It's just an unfortunate part of their venom that causes this issue. What people probably should be worried about, though, is all the other things that cause spider bite-like issues or symptoms. And so these are a lot of things. There's a whole list of things that can cause skin necrosis or ulcers or things like that people, unfortunately, a lot of physicians and a lot of people automatically assume is a spider bite or even a recluse bite, even if recluses are not found in that state and you can't produce a spider, anything like that. If you wake up and you have a infection, spider bite. I mean, it's really, jumping to conclusions. It's also harming the name of spiders, and really perpetuating this fear of spiders in general. And so a lot of these maladies can cause very similar symptoms. And in fact, I've had bacterial infections before, and it's a terrible situation. It was gross, and I really was not happy, but I did not blame it on a spider. But I can see why people might, because it's an easy solution, or an easy answer to what's occurring. And so these are all different conditions. And again, MRSA, Staphylococcus aureus is a really aggressive bacterium. There's a lot of resistant ones now, and they're found even on people's skin. So if you get a puncture by something, it can be introduced in the skin, and then it goes wild and it starts to kind of eat away the flesh and things. So it's really gross, but nowhere was a spider involved, and that's the problem, is that people automatically assume that that's what it is. Now, there is a great Rick Vedder also created then this great mnemonic for how to tell what is not a recluse bite. So it's not recluse, which is pertinent, obviously. And I'm not going to go over all these. Maybe somebody can screenshot this if you want to see. But the paper is here, not recluse. And basically, it's a lot of things that people actually don't even consider when they're looking at these things. For instance, raised, where is it? Where's it elevated? So, for instance, if the bite is elevated a little bit, it's not a recluse. They're actually sunken into the skin a little bit. Or the color. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's got a red center. Oh, it's got to be a recluse bite." No, they have a pale blue or white center, which is exactly different than what a lot of people think. Or ulcerates or exudates. So if it's pussy or liquidy, it's not a recluse bite. So these are things that people assume, and bacterial infections are much more common. All these other things are much, much more common than spider bites. And unfortunately, people latch onto the spider thing very quickly. And here's a specific thing. If two or more of the not recluse signs are present, recluse bite is even less likely. So none are nodular or red in the center, like wasp stings. Another common combination is red and exudative. So there were too red, too wet. So if it's too red and too wet, which is pretty gross to think about, but that is not a spider bite. That is, or specifically not a recluse bite. That is going to be probably some kind of bacterial infection, like I said. And this was a really interesting thing that Rick Vetter published, and I love this. So in this review of it, he basically, and I find this a lot, and I guess this is a really good, this is a really interesting thing to understand, is that spider bite is an oddly comforting diagnosis for patients with skin lesions. It becomes a badge of courage that they survived an encounter with a beast of perceived danger. People who feel they have suffered Loxosceles recount their stories for years, which are then retold by others. And I will tell you, every time I talk about recluses, somebody says, "Oh, my grandpappy got bit by one," whatever. And I can't, because oh, outside. Well, if it was outside, it's probably not a recluse, things like that. And what's even more funny is that in contrast, one rarely recounts to friends and colleagues a personal bout with a bacterial infection, especially long after the incident. So nobody's shouting about, talking about how their grandpappy got a bacterial infection, because that's not really cool or interesting. So unfortunately, I hear this a lot. People come through the lab, I tell them about recluses. They said, "Oh, so-and-so got bit by one." Well, how do you know that? Well, he just did. It looked like it. Well, as I showed, there are a lot of things that can cause similar symptoms. And so I really, caution people from jumping to that conclusion without knowing first that there are recluses in a home, or even a dead spider, because again, usually they're typically maimed when crushed against the skin. So I really try and tell people that, if there's no real evidence for a spider bite, I wouldn't assume that it's one. And in fact, more often than not, it's something else that looks like a spider bite. And after the fact, it's almost impossible to tell unless you have a dead spider there, or something like that. Is really difficult to confirm that you have been bitten by a spider. So I would definitely caution people from jumping to that conclusion. And I will say that it is very rare. So to cleanse everyone's palate of this gross stuff, here's a cute little spider on a flower, just to show how cute spiders are. I really enjoy them. And I wanted to wrap up this talk. And I'll have time for questions. I leave plenty of time for questions, it looks like. Just with a quiz. So I won't be able to, I guess, see answers from all you all, but do this in your head. So pop quiz, spot the recluse spider. All right. Chris, do you have an answer?
I think I know this one.
What is it?
None of the above.
Wow, you're so sharp, man.
You
were right. Yes, none of the above. So I tried to trick you a little bit. Most people will say A. That's a local spider, the southern house spider, that looks a lot like a recluse. But Chris, can you tell me why it's not a recluse here?
Let's see. Spiny legs.
Spiny legs. There you go.
All the eyes are clustered right in the middle of the head.
Yep.
And that is not a very distinct fiddle.
Yep. And they actually have really long palps. In fact, back on the palp page, there was one of these too. And similar, they're actually not distantly related, but these are completely harmless spiders that are very often confused for brown recluses, very common in homes here in North Carolina and the South. The males are out patrolling for females, so they're seen, and they're kind of goofy and completely harmless. And again, somebody might just step on it right away and say, "Oh, brown recluse." And that poor little spider was now just trying to find some love, and you've destroyed its life. So be careful out there. But here again is a real recluse. So just to show, again, the little features. So we got that kind of nice fiddle on the back, which again isn't always present. Got those 3 sets of eyes. You got these velvety legs, and you can see if we go back, the really big spines on the legs on this one compared to no spines at all on this one. About the size of a quarter. You've got a recluse, and hopefully you don't have any in North Carolina or other places. I know that people who may be tuning in from their native range will say, "Oh yeah, they're all over the place. I've gotten bitten by them," things like that. It certainly could be true in the native range, and they do attain high numbers in homes, but they're not trying to bite people. They're really just trying to defend themselves. They're very timid spiders, and really they are also really interesting in the venom they produce, and their kind of sociality a little bit. We also don't know how they disperse. They don't balloon like other spiders to get to other places. In fact, Rick, when I was talking to him way back when, mentioned how they'll put traps outside of homes that are infested and never catch them out there. So they seem to stay in the home, in the structures and stuff, and don't tend to go outside. Although, like I said, in native range, you can peel bark off of a dead tree and sometimes find recluses or under stones. So it's just very interesting spiders. And I think honestly, we need to tip the scales back to more respect and whatnot than complete fear. Again, there are ways to protect yourself. There are some reasons to be afraid of them, but I think it really needs to be tempered with the fact that they aren't bloodthirsty, killers and out there to get everyone. And so I hope you learned a little bit about recluses today, and I'll leave that open for some questions then.
All right. Fantastic stuff. Awesome. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks. Yeah, no problem. I don't know if there are other myths too that people want debunked. I was trying to think of some of the myths, the other myths. They don't, let's just say also spiders don't lay eggs in people. They can't do that. They also can't infest people. There was a story out of Australia showing this red line in somebody's belly, and somebody said a spider burrowed in there. Spiders are very weak creatures. In fact, if they get punctured or broken, they're basically dead because they use pressure to expand their legs, to stretch out their legs. They have muscles to bring them in, but they use pressure to extend their legs, which means if you puncture them or hurt them in some way, they lose that pressure, body pressure, and they can't actually function. So spiders are really delicate creatures. They look creepy and scary, and they have venom, but they're pretty delicate, and they have a lot of enemies. And hopefully, humans are not always that enemy, because people tend to just crush them for no reason. So yeah.
Yeah, this is fantastic. The information is very good. There's people in the chat who are like, okay, I have my list of identifying features. We're ready to go out into the world and make sure that the spiders in our homes aren't brown recluses, and we're all okay. And then we can tell everybody else who says that they saw one or were bitten by one, no, you didn't.
And I will say, yeah, there's a Twitter account that we created a long time ago called Recluse or Not, which I'm not running right now. I feel bad. Somebody else has been running it for a while, and she's doing a great job at it, and I really need to touch base with her again. But it's called Recluse or Not, and you can tweet your photos to that account and get IDs on whether it's a recluse or not. I will say most of the time it's not. And most of the time when it is, it's somewhere in the native range where we'd expect them. Every once in a while we get kind of records outside the native range, but like I said, there's kind of a strange spider with that fact. So
okay, yeah, interesting. So as people are downloading and the talk and getting their questions posted into the chat, and folks, type stuff up, let us know what you're thinking, what questions you've got, and maybe experiences as well. We'll share those in just a second. So Matt, I actually grew up in Nashville, Tennessee, which is squarely within brown recluse range. So I remember growing up and everybody had the stories, but then I got to learn a little bit about them and realized that even in my home, family's homes, friends' homes, still couldn't find them. Like they were still
interesting.
Rare. Or we might find like one, but it would be in an attic or in a basement. Like for some reason, I don't know if this is true or not. You can answer this one perhaps. They were always associated with cardboard boxes. And I don't know if it's because the cardboard boxes go in the dark, scary places in a house, or if there's something about boxes.
Yeah, so it's interesting you said, yeah, so Tennessee is square in the recluse range, and so yeah, Memphis has a lot of them. Most of the state is really in there, and we will get a lot of those in the recluse or not thing. They really like tight spaces, so boxes are perfect. The flaps, under the box, places like that, they love to create their webs. They'll stick to it, and actually, you could see it. You saw in that last photo that was actually on a box in a shed. Again, they were moving stuff between the house and the shed. Neighbors never saw any, but of course the shed is infested, the house is infested, and they were all over the cardboard boxes. And I thought it was a fun shot because you could tell it was actually a cardboard box that was on, and super common habitat really for them. We get they get moved because of that, I think, because they like to be on boxes and in boxes when people are packing up and bringing them. In fact, this professor, his family moved, I want to say, from Alabama, maybe to Tennessee, maybe to here. So they had a couple chances, and they knew early on they'd had that infestation for over 40 years. And again, nobody had gotten bitten. When I went there, it was amazing. It was like, wow, everything you lift up, you find one or shed skin or something. And it was like, I can't believe nobody's been bitten. It's like, I would be freaked out. I will say I would be freaked out. I would probably, do some kind of control, try and kind of clean up and kind of do as many things that I could to get that population down. And I'm not immune to that stuff. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. And again, some of these populations are huge in homes, but again, they're very, very delicate spiders. They're not really out to get people, and they're very timid. So yeah, but that's great to hear that you didn't really see that many, and even in the range, I would say Arkansas and Missouri seem to be the epicenter where people find a lot, but Tennessee is well within the range and whatnot. So we get a lot of contacts from there too.
So some questions from the chat for you. Stacy was curious if you could clarify whether on the map, the range map that you showed us, whether the shaded area is where they're found indoors or outdoors. And relatedly, like you mentioned, you could peel back some bark, but I feel like the only time I ever saw them in Tennessee was inside of a house.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why they are much more commonly found in homes than outdoors. The southwestern species are almost exclusively found outdoors, but the brown recluse is a weird one. It seems to be much more common indoors. And this is why it probably spreads a little bit more, or is more countered by people, of course. And the shaded range is where this is why it's complicated. The shaded range is where we would consider them to be native and easily found, whether it's indoors or outdoors. Outdoors, like I said, a little less so, but whereas outside the range, you can find populations, again, where somebody moved one from the native range into, say, a house in Raleigh. But that hasn't spread because if they've been obviously in the US since before humans were here. And maybe they've spread a little bit more because of humans, but really we would expect them to be found all over the US by now. And in North Carolina as well, because we know of populations. So what's happening is that they're getting to that human structure. They don't want to be outdoors. They're going to stay in that human structure, breed, it's probably very inbred, and they're not getting out to go to other houses, even next door. And in fact, we had one of those children who was bitten in North Carolina. I didn't want to publish on it because, it was just kind of, anecdotal, ancillary kind of information. But I asked if we could get the contact information for the family so I could go and look. And I found several dead recluses in their house. So I was pretty confident that that's what happened. Now, several years later, some pest control person came with some recluses and said, "Oh, we found these." They actually were in the same apartment complex, sharing on the same block of apartments or townhouses as the same infestation we knew about before. I would guess even across the parking lot, you wouldn't find them unless somebody was moving them between those places. So they're really just kind of hunker down. They kind of build up populations. And we are actually about to start back up a project where we got a lot of people to send us spiders from all over, from outside the range, inside the range. And we're going to be doing some population genetics to see where they're from. And which, I suspect most of them are kind of going to be related to populations from inside the range. And again, they're just kind of spreading by humans, but not really spreading otherwise. So if you don't see them, you almost certainly don't have them, and your neighbors probably don't have them either. So.
Excellent stuff. All right. How is a recluse bite treated?
That's a difficult one, and I don't know exactly. I wouldn't say contentious necessarily, but there's not a really easy way to treat them. They've used all different kinds of forms of treatment before, but it's because it's not like an infection, like we talked a little bit about. There's a compound in the venom called Sphiominulase D. It's this weird, yeah, it's this really difficult to say compound that is actually only found also in some bacteria. They're like flesh eating and things like that. What it does is it breaks down tissue and especially fats and whatnot. And so it's just this chemical that causes these kind of signals and death in tissue. So it's not like you can trade it with antibiotics, things like that. That's also another thing. If I hear somebody say, "Oh, I was on antibiotics," that's a red flag. That's something that they know that there's a bacterial infection. And in fact, they've shown that spiders are fairly clean, and so they don't actually introduce bacteria typically in bites. And so I don't think there's a really effective treatment, but luckily 90% of the time, 99% of the time, even if he takes a while to heal, it will heal naturally. It just sometimes in those very rare situations, it can cause a very large kind of ulcer, kind of really, that's the kind of the worst case scenario is what people worry about the most. And again, unfortunately, it does happen sometimes, but it's got to be in the minority of cases that something really bad happens like that. Otherwise, they just say, the rate elevate it, cold compress, try and look after it, like you would any other kind of injury or kind of thing that would happen like that. So, obviously go see your doctor if you've been bitten by one. But again, don't assume it's something like that if it could be something else, like a bacterial infection or whatnot.
Carry that paper to your doctor office and
Yeah.
when they tell you were bitten by a recluse in Raleigh, you can say, listen, I don't
Yeah.
live in the 3 addresses.
Yeah. Again, if you also have to search all around your home to try and find even one recluse and you can't find even a single one, it's probably not a recluse, so.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's see here. Question from the chat. What is your most interesting or most exciting spider encounter, and what made you want to become an entomologist?
Ooh,
Guessing
that's a tough one.
you wanted to study arthropods because of that spider bite when you were a kid, right?
Yeah, it turned
Turned
me
you into a
into,
super
yeah,
spider.
exactly. I wish. No, I don't know what made me want to study insects and spiders and arthropods. In fact, I was more interested probably in scorpions and spiders than I was in insects necessarily when I was really young. But I don't know. I was always fascinated with kind of creepy things and monsters and whatnot. And they're just so diverse. So many are beautiful, so many are kind of creepy, but I always kind of enjoyed that stuff. I was always flipping rocks, looking for insects and spiders and whatnot to collect. Yeah, that wolf spider encounter was pretty interesting because it was definitely a wolf spider. I put in a bucket of water and dumbly I grabbed it with my hand, and that's when it bit me. And my mom was like, "Yeah, just take some Tylenol, whatever, it'll be all right." And it basically was. I'm still here today, obviously. But yeah, there's been some great spider encounters. One recently was you all know Alvin Braswell, who was a former, I think he was former director of the museum. He always, when he has some really great stuff on his property. But whenever he finds weird spiders, he lets me know. But he found a purse web spider on his property that was in a jar. It made its web in a jar, and I've always wanted one. So he gave it to me. I rehomed it. It did really well, and then it developed into a male that kind of left its web and was searching for a female, but the wrong time of year. So it's a preserved male now for a study that some colleagues are going to be doing on this spider. But it was really fantastic to put it in a container, let it make its tube. I would hold some cockroaches up to the tube, and it would grab them from the inside and drag them in, and then fix the tube each day. And it was really fun little spider to have. So yeah, little things. I love keeping spiders. Every once in a while, I have a black widow on my desk right now that I need to feed. Actually, it reminds me. And I have another trapdoor spider from Alvin that I'm not sure yet. It hasn't yet fed, but it's created a tunnel, I think. So I'm hoping that goes well. But they're just really neat creatures, and as long as even the black widow, when I open the tank and everything, the cage and everything, and it kind of crawls around, it's like I don't freak out. They're not, again, they're not aggressive. It's not trying to harm me. Just respecting the spiders is really important, and they're going to do their own thing. So yeah.
On that question, David wanted to know what spiders are most common in North Carolina, like Charlotte and Raleigh, where we have a lot of viewers.
Yeah, definitely. So in and around homes, there are a couple of really common spiders. So the kind of fat-bodied, smallish ones that kind of hang upside down in cobwebs. We call cobwebs, or these irregular webs that kind of intertwine and everything. They're kind of mottled brownish, and typically on the outsides of homes, but on the insides of homes are going to be the cobweb spiders, especially the common house spider, which is Parasteatoda, and they're really common on houses and houses. There's also some steatoda, these false widows. So they look like black widows when they're mature, many of them. Then they're all dark, but they don't have the hourglass under them. And they're very common in like garages, and I have a lot of them in my workshop and places like that. But they're the very fat-bodied spiders that hang upside down and short leg ones that hang upside down in webs. And then another really common one are the cellar spiders. These are the really, people call them sometimes daddy long legs. They're the really long-legged spiders. They live in irregular webs as well. They'll shake their webs when you come near sometimes to kind of scare you off, but they're completely harmless. But they have the really extremely long, thin legs. And one last one that's really common around homes are these ones that make these kind of sheet-like webs with a little tunnel in them, called grass spiders or funnel web spiders. Not to be confused with the Australian funnel web spiders, which are deadly, but these are not dangerous, and they often create their webs in bushes around houses. But you can see lots of different spiders around. There's a lot of orb weavers, these big barn spiders, and create those classic orb webs and sit in the middle. And we actually haven't seen any much this year yet because they've been very young and making small webs. But in the next few months, you're going to start to see more and more of these large orb weavers around porches and places like that. Completely harmless, basically blind. They're just kind of sitting in the web. And, if you catch a little moth and throw it in there or something like that, I guess it's bad for the moth. But you can watch the spider go down and catch it and wrap it up and feed on it. And, they're not going to harm you or anything. So, yeah, those are the most common spiders around, I would say.
I can admit to spending maybe more time than most people sitting on the porch watching orb weavers spin their webs and then make meals out of the moths that get attracted by porch lights. I might have maybe left the porch light on a little longer just
I know.
to bait some food for my spiders.
And they're thankful for that, I'm sure. But yeah, and it's just amazing, their architecture and how spiders do all this stuff.
All right. Are spiders diurnal, nocturnal, or indiscriminate?
Yeah, that's it really depends on the type of spider. So many are nocturnal. Again, they don't really have big eyes. They don't really need to see. They're doing most of the things through feel. And a lot of them are just sitting in a web. And so they'll hide. A lot of those orb weavers will hide near the web during the day in like leaves or up in kind of eaves or places like that, and then spin a web at night and preparing for the whole night where they're going to be hopefully catching prey. But spiders like jumping spiders that have those really big eyes are oftentimes found outdoors during the day, where they're kind of running around, crawling around looking for prey. And it's harder to do at night, obviously. So they're out looking at prey and jumping on it and eating it. So they typically are going to be more diurnal. And a lot of spiders will make little kind of hideaways, like little silk sleeping bags where they're just gonna go hang out over and during the night and then get up in the morning, or vice versa, depending on what type of spider it is. But I would say the majority are going to be nocturnal because their sense of touch and things like that is much more sensitive than their eyes, and they're really going to be kind of crawling around, and that's when a lot of the insects are active as well.
Great stuff. And this one came up in the chat, and some other folks in the chat jumped in and answered it, and I believe correctly, but I'm going to get your take on it. Daddy long legs and this idea that they're the most poisonous, venomous, I guess, animals out there.
Yeah, yep, I hear that a lot too. So it's funny because daddy long legs is a common name, and in fact, if you're in Britain, it would refer to a crane fly, which is not dangerous at all. And those big mosquito hawks that people see around here, the big mosquito eaters or whatever. They're just a fly, harmless fly, not even related to mosquitoes. Don't eat mosquitoes. That's daddy long legs in Britain. We don't really call that here. The cellar spiders are true spiders. Those are sometimes called daddy long legs because they have those really long, thin legs. They have a venom, but they are not dangerous, and they can barely pierce the skin. They can apparently, but they're not aggressive. They're not dangerous at all. What most people are talking about are going to be these harvestmen or harvesters, these kind of like a ball with all these like hair-like legs all over the body. Those are arachnids, but they're not actually spiders. They are a group of arachnids that are really common in North Carolina and everywhere basically. And they are not venomous at all. So they actually just have these kind of the chelicerae that spiders have with those fangs. They actually have kind of more claw-like ones. So they pick apart prey, and they're really not active hunters. They're more scavengers. They will feed on kind of wounded or like slow-moving arthropods. They may scavenge on some other things too, but they're not super adept predators like many of the true spiders are. So they don't have venom at all. So obviously that's not true. But that is probably one of the most common myths I would hear about arachnids around, which is funny because I never heard about that when I was younger. It was really when I moved here to North Carolina, which is interesting that I started hearing that myth. But yep, they're completely harmless. You can hold on to them, but be careful. Their legs fall off and twitch everywhere, and it's kind of gross and probably bad for them. So be careful when you hold them, but they're perfectly fine for children to hold. They're great animals to get to know because they're completely harmless and they're very common. So yeah.
Excellent stuff. Matt, thanks for being on the program today. Great
No
information.
problem. Yeah, of course. This is a lot of fun and great questions, and thanks for everyone who tuned in.
Folks, we'll be back here again next Wednesday at noon with another presentation. Next Wednesday, we're going to be hearing from the naturalist for the National Wildlife Federation, David Mizejewski. You may have seen David on like The Tonight Show or The Today Show, or on his popular social media feeds, or as part of the Garden for Wildlife campaign out of NWF. So he's a friend of the show. We're going to be really excited to have him. That's next Wednesday at noon here at the museum's YouTube channel. You can get more information at naturalsciences.org, the museum's website, or the Office of Environmental Education site, eenorthcarolina.org. So I hope that we'll see you again next week. Come bring your questions, bring your thoughts and stories. We'll be excited to hang out and see what's going on over at the National Wildlife Federation with David. Until then, everybody, take care, be well. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.